Hi, I'm Bill DiGiulio, and I recently did a live stream on Instagram, and I got a very interesting question from a fellow musician, guitarist. They wanted to know some tips or some ideas on how to motivate themselves to practice. Since that's one of the key things that we need to do as musicians, sometimes it's difficult to stay motivated or to motivate ourselves to do the practicing that we know we want to do. So I had a few suggestions, and I have a few more that I'd like to share that I didn't get a chance to share on my Instagram feed. And a few of these, all these, as you'll see, are basically coming from more of a positive state of mind. What a lot of people try to do is kind of browbeat themselves into practicing. In other words, they'll feel terribly guilty and then force themselves or require themselves to spend a certain amount of practice time by just sheer discipline. Now, if that works for you, that's great. But a lot of people find that that's not the best approach. Sometimes using a more positive way of reinforcing is a better way to do it. So all the areas I'm going to mention today don't require a tremendous amount of browbeating or self-flagellation. It's just a matter of proper mindset, basically, okay, and a lot of common sense. So if some of these sound very simplistic, give them a try before you discount them, because you'd be surprised how effective sometimes simple ideas can be. Now, one of the first suggestions I would say would be to, and this is one I mentioned at my live stream, is to listen and or watch inspiring musical performances of bands or players you like to listen to and who really inspire you to enjoy music. Many times now with so many great videos on Instagram and on YouTube, not only can we listen to the performances or our favorite songs, we can also watch our favorite performers perform them either live or sometimes even in the studio. And that could be a great resource, because sometimes watching a performance instead of only listening to it can even add to the excitement and the motivation to get us to want to get into practicing. So that would be the first thing to do. I would make that my primary way of doing it. Make a listening list, pardon the expression, of things you like to listen to, guitars and or albums you enjoy, and make it a regular habit to do a lot of listening. That way, notice as you get into that, you'll be motivated more often to want to practice. Now, a second idea, which again may sound overly simplistic, but I found it very effective with myself and with other people I've mentioned it to, is to have your instrument on a music stand or on a stand of some kind, plugged in, ready to play. So as soon as you get the motivation or the idea to practice, you can walk over, pick it up, and start playing, and you have all your materials handy. If you have a music stand with your music handy, backing tracks, cables, whatever, have everything ready to go. Because many times we get the idea to practice, then we have to pull the guitar out, take it out of the case, tune it because it hasn't been tuned in months, find a cable, move the amp to a position, gather our materials, and etc. And we find sometimes by the time we've done most of that, sometimes we've lost the motivation to practice, or we end up practicing for a lot shorter time than we would have otherwise. So in other words, by getting a good guitar stand, plugging everything in, having it ready to go, as soon as we get the idea to practice, we can start without any pauses in between or preparations needed. We can just go. Now, of course, there are times when that's not possible. If you have inquisitive pets or very young children, you may need to keep your instruments out of harm's way or locked in a case. We don't want any toddlers knocking over your vintage 59 Les Paul and breaking the headstock, of course. Not a good idea. But unless that's a possibility, it's great to have your instrument ready to go 24/7. So whenever you feel like practicing, you can do it. And of course, having all your materials ready to go too. If you're working out of learning of pieces, have your book there. If you have backing tracks, have your playback recorder ready to go, plugged in, whether you're using speakers, headphones, whatever. Have it all set at a moment's notice. So by making it convenient to practice, you'll have a higher motivation to get into it. It won't take a really stretch a large amount of work to prepare yourself to practice, and then by the time you actually are ready, you'll find a lot of the motivation is gone. Now another idea is to, and here again, this will sound simple, but it can be very effective. Have the guitar ready to practice by having fresh strings and having a clean and polished instrument. So if you find you haven't changed your strings in a long time, and your strings are quite dirty or dead or possibly even rusted, which I've seen on a lot of students' guitars, believe it or not, it's a great idea to get change the strings, and while the strings are off, you can polish the instrument or clean it, and even clean the fretboard, because sometimes people that perspire a lot or have a very dirty hands sometimes when they play, the fretboard tends to get dirt or dust on it, and will sometimes even coat the frets to some degree, which could interfere with your tone. There is actually also a product which makes it very easy to clean a fretboard and the frets, made by a company called GHS, which also makes strings. They make a product called Gorgamite. That's it's little cloths impregnated with a material which will clean the fretboard and the frets to like new condition, so that once you've done that and changed your strings, you get the optimum playability on your instrument. And sometimes even just knowing you're going to pick up a guitar with fresh strings and is playing the best it can and looks good as well is enough motivation to get you going. Now another idea is to have realistic goals when you practice. Again, this comes from the more positive frame of mind. Many people tend to sit down to practice and pick either too difficult a song that's way above their level, and they end up getting frustrated because it doesn't sound as good as it should, and then don't carry through their practice. Or they try to learn too much at one time. They learn and try to learn maybe an entire solo or an entire song, instead of just taking small pieces and working on 4-bar sections, 8-bar sections, and repeating them until they're thoroughly learned, and then reviewing that and putting it all together. So by having unrealistic expectations when you practice, that will also be a strong disinterest creator. Okay? Instead of having the concept of that, okay, I'm only going to work on 4 bars, so this will be very easy to do today. I can approach this with a positive frame of mind, and I can accomplish this in my 20 to 30 minutes. And I'll enjoy the process. It won't be a frustrating experience for me. So that would be another suggestion. And also another thing, if you find that you're extremely picky about the way you practice, and you're overly picky about your performances when you're practicing, you might want to relax your expectations also and how it sounds when you're practicing. Because many people tend to frustrate themselves by expecting it to sound just like Jeff Beck played it, or Segovia played it, or B.B. King played it. You may not be at that point where you can duplicate that exactly. So by relaxing your expectations in the beginning and only doing, getting it in the ballpark and then further polishing it as you go, that'll make for a much more pleasurable practice session. And you'll find that you'll make progress faster if you stay in a positive state of mind. That's been my experience, I would say. Now, another idea is to have a goal that you want to work toward. In other words, if you know you have a performance or a recording that you're preparing for, you're more likely to want to practice. That would be your motivation, knowing that you have a performance. Now, of course, with the current situation with a lot of live performances not possible, especially in some areas of the country that are still very locked down, live performances per se might not be possible, but there's always the internet. You could always do a live stream on whatever platform, on Facebook or on Instagram, or prepare a video for YouTube, and that would be the recording session that you're practicing for, or live performance. So by knowing that you're going to have to perform in front of a small or possibly large number of people, that will definitely point you in the right direction as far as mastering the material you want to play. Or another, if live performance is not your cup of tea, you can decide to practice to prepare a release of some kind, CD, download, whatever form. Now, the reason you want to practice for that is that it makes the recording process a lot easier. You may say, well, obviously when I'm recording, I don't have to do it in one take. I can take as much time as I need and do take after take and edit, and I don't have to get it perfect the first time. Of course that's true, and that's a great thing about recording. But especially if you're doing your own engineering, which most people will do, they might have the luxury of hiring an engineer to record their CD or album. By practicing and having the material down cold, the playing part would not be too much of a challenge. You could spend part of your brain energy on getting a good recording, as far as getting levels, getting EQ, working on the recording process. So that will be a lot less painful than having to worry about the recording as well as the technical end of getting the recording onto the computer or whatever format you're using. So by having a reason to practice, as I said, like a live performance or some kind of recording session, that will give you a great opportunity to practice as well. Now, another possibility too is, as far as live performance, you may think, well, the live performances are allowed in my area, but there are no gigs available. Okay, nobody wants to pay, so I'm not going to do any live performances. Keep in mind that just the act of performing sometimes is a great preparation for and is a great experience. Even if a place like a cafe or a restaurant or a club may not have a budget, that doesn't mean that you're unable to perform there. In fact, if you're under certain circumstances, it can be quite beneficial. In fact, when I was preparing for one of my graduate recitals at SC, I had not had a lot of experience in playing solo guitar. I had played in bands all my life, but I had not played a lot of solo guitar, which was the point of the recital. So I approached a owner of a cafe bakery in my area and asked if it would be okay with them if I could come in and play gratis for a couple hours on a Saturday afternoon for whatever customers would come in, and that would give me the required experience. So number one, I have a motivation to learn my material so I don't make a fool of myself when I'm playing in front of a live audience. And also, I get the practice of not only practicing where I could stop and fix things, but now I get to see how well my practicing has gone by performing it in front of people. Because obviously in a live performance situation, you're not going to have to stop and make corrections. You have to keep going. That's a skill you have to learn. So by creating a performance for yourself, you benefit twice by giving yourself a motivation to practice, and it will give you an opportunity to judge how successful your practice sessions are, because now you're performing in front of a live audience. Now, another possibility is to find a fellow musician to jam with and or practice with. If it's a situation where you want to practice improvisation, instead of using backing tracks, it's a great idea to find another musician at approximately your level that's interested in the same kind of music and actually accompany each other while you practice improvisation. Especially with jazz, it's great because you learn how to react to a soloist. Obviously, if you're practicing with backing tracks, you don't get that opportunity. Just simply because obviously a backing track is not going to react to what you're playing, obviously. So that would be one situation. Another is if you want to practice something like sight reading. Back again, when I was going to school, sight reading was something we had to master to some degree because it was required for our degree. And it was quite a frustrating experience because sight reading on guitar is one of the more challenging aspects of playing. So many of my friends and I, we would get together in duos and practice sight reading, either out of a book of duets of some kind or just unison lines. Just put on the metronome and practice playing things in unison and seeing how accurately we could play them and how good of a unison we could get. And that is, again, a further motivator, because not only do you get the practice when your practicing partner comes over, or also you might want to practice even to prepare for that, because you want to make the most of the time when someone comes over. Of course, an additional thing would be a band situation. If you're fortunate to have a practice space and know enough people to have a band session of some kind, that's another reason to practice, is to learn material for a band rehearsal. So, although, like I said, that's less common now with the COVID situation, but if you are in that situation, getting even a duo or a trio together would require you to sit down and possibly learn new songs and new material to get your practice session going. So these are just some basic ideas, some suggestions to motivate yourself to practice. As I said, they're all of a quite positive nature, which I think you'll find very effective. And I hope this has been of some help. Any questions, comments, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. And have a great afternoon.